Hello, thank you for joining this program of The Black Family, united by history, restored by storytelling, brought to you by New York Life. The Association for the Study of African American Life and History, in collaboration with Archival Alchemy, presents this national program that highlights the legacy of Black family reunions while encouraging families of all backgrounds to build and renew their own familial traditions and stories. We encourage you to watch the rest of the videos in this series to learn more about oral storytelling, genealogy, and familial archiving. Once you view all of the videos, you could receive a certificate as a family historian from the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Today's program brings together our project's workshop facilitators to respond to frequently asked questions regarding Black family history and to discuss issues that arise in practice. And now, let's pass it over to our moderator, Joyce Leanne of Archival Alchemy. To learn more about the workshop's facilitators, please see their bios in the YouTube description.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this facilitated discussion and Q&A with our workshop facilitators. I know that you all have probably viewed their recordings and their facilitation of their individual workshops, but we wanted to bring them all together to be in conversation and to answer some questions from some folk in our ASALH community. So what we're going to be doing here is I'm going to be looking at my notes because I have thorough notes for this session. I'll be moderating. My name is Joyce Leanne. I am an interdisciplinary artist, an archivist, and the founder of Archival Alchemy. And Archival Alchemy is a producing partner for this Black family project, Black Family History Project. So, all right. So again, we wanted each facilitator to come into this kind of communal space because we wanted to know, we feel that so much of the work of oral storytelling, of genealogy, of preserving family history is interconnected, is in conversation with each other. And we wanted to give a visual example of that by putting all our facilitators in conversation with each other. I encourage you all to speak to the things that you feel called to. It does not just have to be something that you specifically have expertise in. We all have experiential expertise of our own experiences, of our own lives. And so we invite you all to speak to that. We have our studio audience for this recording who have some great questions for you all. And again, even with the studio audience, if we want to tap into the expertise of that we have communally here, we all have something from our experience that we can share. And so if anyone feels called to share anything or chime in on a question or feel like you have some words to offer, please just give us a good little hand raise and I'll try to make sure we flow through getting everyone to speak. So what we'll do now, I think before we get into the questions, is we will have each of our facilitators that you will get to know thoroughly through the recordings of their specific workshops. Just give a brief introduction to who they are and what workshop that they facilitated. And we can just, yes, Brian, go, yes, go ahead.
Well, greetings, everyone. I'm Ryan Hethcock. My profession is that I am a videographer, but I specialize in oral history, documentation, and preservation. I am known within the world of ASALH as ASALH's videographer because I've been working with them for quite some time, helping to document not only the work, but the research that the members of ASALH have been doing for the past 8 to 9 years. And it is a joy, a pleasure, and an honor to be here today with you all and my fellow panelists. Thank you for having me.
How about we take it over to you, Skylar? Thank you for being here with us, Ryan.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Skylar Hearn. Professionally, I am an archivist, special collections librarian, and at one point I was a photographer. Maybe one day I will pick that back up. So I am currently the manager of archives for Cook County government here in Chicago. Cook County is the second largest county in the country under Los Angeles. And I've recently been with the county for a little over a year now. I am the inaugural manager, so it's a completely new department. I'm the first one to hold this position, so I'm very proud of that. And I am also very proud of the fact that I am a co-founder of the Blackivists. We are a collective of 6 Black archivists who are Chicago centric, meaning primarily we are from Chicago and or represent Chicago, as one of us is currently in Portland. But we came together to address the needs of our community that we felt weren't being met by institutions. And so we work along with the Black community, the archives adjacent community as well, to support community archiving projects and so forth. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here with us, Skyla. Congratulations to you, sis, on the trajectory of your career. We love to see it. Skyla and I, we are a part of what we call a Black memory workers community. And I'm happy to have you here, and thank you for all that you do in this work, in this field. So thank you for your efforts. And then let's maybe take it over to you, Timothy.
Peace and good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure and honor to be here. I'm Timothy Prolific Advajante. I am a poet, educator, genealogist, organizer, curator, and cultivator. I have been doing genealogical work for about 20 years, particularly around my own family, and working on utilizing genealogical research as an aid in building cases for private reparations. And I'll be teaching the Genealogy 101 course.
Thank you. I know you as Brother Pro, so appreciate you being here, Brother Pro. We are also in community together. Shout outs to Weeksville Heritage Center, which is kind of a home base for us in some of the work that we do. Gina Paige, thank you for being here with us. Would you introduce yourself to the folks?
Hello, everyone. I'm Gina Paige. I'm in the business of being Black, and I love Black people. And that shows up every day in my role as the president and co-founder of AfricanAncestry.com. We are the pioneers of genetic ancestry tracing for Black people around the world. And it's our mission to help Black people transform the way we view ourselves and the way we view Africa. We do that through DNA. And we are the only company that can reconnect Black people to a present day African country and ethnic group with which they share ancestry. So I'm happy to be here today. Thanks.
Yes, Gina, yes. Thank you for being here. Thank you for loving us, for helping us find out where we come from. Your efforts are much appreciated. And yes, I will say I too love, it's just awesome to be who we are, to come from who we are. And I love the work that we all do collectively to rediscover just how fly and fabulous we are as a people. So thank you for all your work. Denyce, if you go ahead, I think you are our last facilitator to be introduced.
Good afternoon. I'm honored to be here with you all today. I am a professional genealogist, writer, and lecturer, and I have been actually researching for almost 30 years and have come to this occupation from my corporate business occupation, and I'm loving this. This is my passion. I'm interested in genealogy because I think that's a path for all of us, all African Americans, to understand who we are, who our ancestors were, and how we can move forward with our future generations in helping to strengthen our people. I'm a member of the African American Genealogy Group of Kentucky and came to this opportunity with ASALH through my participation there. And I facilitate the finding African American families through federal records. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I'm going to get the conversation started. And all those who have not been, who are on screen, who have not been introduced, will be introducing yourselves as you're going to be helping us. We said this discussion and this Q&A is really powered by the people, the community of ASALH, which the rest of the folk on the screen who haven't introduced themselves yet have done. And so, yes, I just see something in the chat from Ryan. Denyce raises a great point. How did we all get to be in the positions we're currently occupied with our respective fields of Black history, research, and genealogy? Point for later. Okay, yes, incorporate that. We can incorporate that into our responses. I'll speak for myself for a second. Y'all was really picking yourselves up. I feel like I didn't give myself enough room to say who I really am, you know? And so I would say for myself, I've come to do this work because it was ordained for me. It's a part of my purpose. I've been an archivist and an artist since I was a little girl. I knew what deaccessioning and all these different concepts that I learned in library school were when I was in middle school. I have my own innate methods and intentions for this work. And all of that for me has been in service of healing and transformation. I am creating through my art practice a archive of everything that I have conquered or am overcoming. And that's what brings me to this work. And I have worked professionally as an archivist in many different places, from the Associated Press, corporate archives, to Weeksville Heritage Center, to the New York Public Library. But in 2017, I found Archival Alchemy as a space to hold all of my multitudes. So that's kind of how I've come into this work. And so I think when we go back for everyone else, like kind of how I just circle back to myself, oh, your panel title, is this from for the thing that you did on for ASALH, for the project, Skyla? Yes, so I think when we pass back over to people, maybe if y'all, I don't know if y'all are like me, but I have my cute little note here. So if there's things I need to mention, I'm ready to bring that back up. So if there's something you ain't said about yourself or didn't mention, maybe when it's passed back to you, if you want to just pick up that information. But I'm gonna try to keep us moving along. And I know when we get passionate about this stuff, we could be here and we could be having this conversation all weekend, but we are not gonna do that. I would love for us to get some of this sunshine on this Saturday. I hope the sun is shining where you all are at. I definitely want to get outside. So I'm gonna try to keep this, in a tight space. And we already we wanted to have space for us to introduce ourselves and know who's in the room. But as far as kind of the questions and answers, like I know some of these can be really big questions, but us thinking about brevity and being concise. And so that way, somebody's going to be watching this and we want to make sure that it's something that can be a digestible amount of time for them. So I'm going to be aiming for us to be in conversation around these questions or things that come up out of the questions for no more than an hour. Okay, so let's just all keep that in mind so y'all can help me out, so I can help y'all out, so we can help our viewers out. Miss Audrey, Miss Williams, I wanted to start with you. So when you come on camera, you can introduce yourself, but then you had some questions that I think we speak to Black families more generally. While your questions, and I loved your questions because they weren't directly related to, like, you didn't have a specific oral storytelling question or genealogy question or an archiving question. You had questions that relate to work in all of these disciplines, that those questions I feel like our facilitators, our panelists here can speak to that from their discipline, from their subject of expertise, but that you're really thinking about the Black family in general. And I think that, so I would invite all of our panelists, our workshop facilitators / facilitators to chime in on some of these questions, especially given your introduction, Gina, and just the work that you're doing. I think that you may have a lot to add in this area. But Miss Audrey, Miss Williams, do you have your questions or do you need me to read them for you? And we will go like kind of ask one by one. Yeah.
I did have, I think the first one was, I'm Audrey Perry Williams, and I am the president of the Hampton Roads branch of ASALH, located in Tidewater area of Virginia. We were chartered in 2012, and we had been trying for a few years to get there, and we did finally do that. But I had thought about some questions as far as the family. And I guess my first one was, are the effects of slavery on the family evident today, both good and bad? You know, some good things and some bad.
Oh, no.
And I think in terms of good being the fact that in most cases, families are important to African Americans. In most cases, we value our families, whether they're good or bad. Some things I see negative. One of the things I hear a lot about is the fact that there are I have so many friends who have people in their family who could pass for white, and how they treat the other members of their family if they marry someone darker or have dark children. So those are some of the things I see, you know, good and bad, because I think about my grandmother could pass, but she had 9 children. And so she couldn't go anywhere and take them 9 because they would pass with her. But I've had friends to say things that people said of it. You know, I had one friend, when they went back home, her mother's sister said, why you bring those little darkies with you? So that is one thing that we have, that is an issue with us. And I didn't experience it, but I tell you, my grandmother could pass. But, you know, I didn't experience that. But I've heard people say it, and I think that's one of the, you know, bad effects, because they always had the so-called, you know, mulattoes in the house. They didn't do the field. So that was one of the things I had.
Yes, and we appreciate that question. And I think too, like, to put it into some like context of like what we're doing in this too, we were thinking, like, for example, we're interested in how the effects of slavery make it more difficult to recover our family histories today. And so if you all could provide some specific examples, I'll let y'all take it away. And so Audrey, you and I, we could go on mute while our panelists take it away from here.
I can start from a historical perspective. If we look back to Africa, the impact, one of the major impacts that slavery had on us was the elimination of our identities. So we don't have our names, we don't have our languages. And when you talk about family, our families were torn apart constantly. First, when we were taken from the continent, and then upon arrival in the Americas and the Caribbean, families were continuously sold apart. And so I think one of the impacts that slavery had on the Black family is almost, I might call it a redefinition of family, or a constant evolving of family. Our families became not necessarily our genetic connections, but our connections in other ways, because we were disconnected from those who we gave birth to. And I know that that has had a significant impact on genealogy research that I'll leave to the genealogists to address.
Yeah, I think that enslavement had some definite disruptive effects on the African American family. As Gina pointed out, the separation of family members once we came here, the stigma of based on information that was passed down from enslavers to the enslaved individuals. Part of that goes back to what Audrey said about people feeling the need to pass if their skin color was light enough. And then just the intentional institutional racism that was perpetrated from the time African Americans hit this coast to until now, actually. I think some of the positive effects, though, and I think it may even be ingrained now in our DNA, if you will, is the perseverance and the diligence and the strength to hold on to our history or to search for our history. So I think that they're disruptive and positive effects. And what I think as historians and genealogists are trying to do is to help strengthen that, so that our generations to come and ourselves understand who we are, where we came from, and how we got to this place in terms of our strength and our courage.
Thank you, Denyce. Thank you, Gina, for your responses. Timothy, Pro, you have something to add?
Absolutely. I think what challenged me most about this question is the idea of like positive effects. That's not something I think about very often. I often think about the detriments, intergenerational trauma, and the ways in which experiencing and witnessing that trauma impacts the ways in which we deal with our families in positive ways and in maladaptive ways as well. I'm thinking about the ways in which that trauma plays out within society while dealing with like the current trauma of being Black within the US or in the Caribbean or in the world, where it is never really safe for us in that regard because of enslavement and colonization. But what I think about as well, speaking of like the idea that our languages and religions and our names were stripped, to also remember what we were able to retain. And that's what I was thinking about as I was listening to each of you speak, is what do we retain? And in some ways, the names that we choose for ourselves or for our family members or for our children, we may not realize our ancestral names, that these are things that have been linked and are in a continuum from our ancestors. The practices that we have within the Black church are linked to African traditional religions. The small things that we may take for granted, like in my family, we have a tradition of throwing coins in someone's car when they get a brand new car. And that's been passed down for generations on both sides of my family. My mother and my father have family from North Carolina. I grew up in Long Island. My friend got a car this weekend. We're having this conversation. I'm like, this is an ancestral tradition. This is a continental tradition. And there are many things that we feel that we invented that were here, that we have just forgotten, are connected to who we always were. And even this idea, I think, of being able to redefine family, if you look at village and kin structures on the continent, family is both blood, but family is also chosen. What does it mean to be a part of a larger community that is not just biological, but the people that you're choosing to relate to? And I think that wherever we go, whether it is in the United States, if it's in the Caribbean, in South America, on the continent, these are commonalities that you're able to find of an African state of mind. And I think that we give ourselves far too little credit on what we've been able to keep and what we do. Just look at our food.
Yes, okay. Mic drop, also known as on mute, okay? Thank you for those contributions, Brother Pro. Skyla, you have your hand raised, and I think this is going to be the last response on this question. And then Audrey, I will pass it over to you to ask your fourth question.
Thank you. And I just wanted to piggyback really quickly on what Brother Tim was saying, because I think about all of the things that, in terms of like what we inherit, and I don't even know necessarily that we give ourselves credit for that, because a lot of who we are is just inherited, or a lot of what we display and exhibit is inherited behavior. So I just wanted to just, piggyback on that. And sometimes we don't even have an explanation for the things that we do, why we do them, but we often meet people. I'm from Chicago, and a lot of people, what they say about us Chicagoans is that we're the South and the North, and I'm pretty sure that reigns true for northern cities across, the country, with, our families having had migrated from the South to the North. But what's really interesting is that when we are all in conversation with each other, we learn about these similarities that we have and didn't even know it, right? And so that's what I mean by like these inherited behaviors that we can't quite always explain. But, just thinking about Miss Williams' questions. And, on the subject of passing and colorism, what came to mind was, in thinking of like these issues, I thought about how we're still, grappling with issues of passing, because a lot of these things I think we tend to think about as in the past, because, like with Miss Williams, she mentioned, her grandmother. But I recently read Brett Bennett's The Vanishing Half, and that brings it into contemporary times. And so I don't think that we often think about people who are, currently, maybe like one generation removed, or, actually like Black folks who are now living as, passing for other than Black, right? And so I think that that's just something to call into question, and it makes us like rethink or reimagine history as something that is in the contemporary, not just something of the past. So I just wanted to add that into the conversation.
Yes, shout out to Britt Bennett. That is one of my favorite contemporary novelists. And that book, when you, Miss Williams, when you were speaking, it did make me think about that book. So yes, if you stay out on sound and ask your fourth question, and then I'll put some contextualization to that for our panelists.
All right, Vanishing Half plus Passing by Nella Larson. Those are very good examples. My next question was, how do we instill pride in our African heritage for the young and the old in our families? Because I find that when you start talking about, I talk all the time anyway, but I start talking about Black history, and some of the people, older people, well, I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to hear nothing about slavery. And the young people too. And I try to tell them that 400 plus years, what we have been through as a people, and we are still here, that's a testimony. And we have a lot to be proud of. I mean, when you go back to Africa and you find the things that we did, some of the things that we did. The first university was in Africa. I mean, but they don't tell you this, and we don't know that. And so I will, just can we go about doing that? I said, we do one at a time. I say, if we have a program and we have 3 or 4 people, I figure they're going to tell 3 or 4 people. So, but that is what I find very difficult when we're dealing with our people. They don't want to hear it, and they just want to go through life just thinking that, everything is okay.
Thank you. Thank you for putting this question forth for our panelists. I just want to add some context to this question that Julia and I had thought to. Shout out to Julia Kaiser, who is a part of our Archival Alchemy team, who really put a lot of effort into making this conversation come together today, and also helping with all the recordings. So we recently noted a conceptual framework by Adrian Fikes, Fikes, if I'm mispronouncing that, called A Framework of Joy, Genealogy, and Justice. This framework includes things like legacy building, personal growth, and racial justice. How does the focus of your work connect to these things? And what can we do to instill pride in our Black heritage for both the young and old in our families? Also, how, I think I put that, also how important do you, also another addition to that is like, what is the importance of doing this kind of work in community, which I think Ms. Williams, you spoke to that, like what's the importance of doing this in community rather than as lone researchers?
I think I'll jump right into that. It speaks directly to my work. I have been doing genealogy workshops at the Weeksville Heritage Center here in Brooklyn for the past 4 years. Weeksville is the oldest Black community in New York City, the oldest free Black community. It was founded by James Weeks, who bought a very large parcel of land, and a Black community was developed there and has sustained there, even in this current gentrification ever since. What I would say is important in terms of my target audience for these workshops, they always include youth. In the courses that I teach at an Afrocentric charter school here in Brooklyn called Emperor Charter School, I open my year teaching the etymology and history of my students' names, allowing them to do that research and beginning genealogical research in their families. A part of a focus on Black history is understanding that our history does not begin and end with enslavement, and that on the continent, our people were, yes, they were kings and queens, but we were also so much more than that. And I think that finding entry points that are culturally responsive, like that are relevant to our children, to our youth, to our neighbors, to our communities, to be able to enter into the work that we're going to talk about Black history. Yes, we're going to talk about slavery, but our history is not only slavery. So we're not going to sit and talk about this. It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. I think that finding spaces for Black joy, especially now as we're moving like into the 2020s, is a large part of this focus. As we're combating intergenerational trauma and compounded trauma, is highly important for our healing, and to create these spaces of experiencing joy. So we can talk about the struggle. And I think that as much as we've gone through as a people, that we're in a place where we can shift the focus from the idea of the struggle versus liberatory work. And I think the distinction is important. We can speak about the work for liberation and also understand that all these liberation workers had families and could cook and had parties and had joy. I want to know about the parties they had after the marches. I want to know about, I want that tea. I've been in the room with some of the pioneers of the Black arts movement and heard them talk about the stories of the conversations that they would have, their conflicts, that these are human beings that we are studying. And when we study the humanity of our ancestors, whether they're in our family or within our communities historically, that we are able to enrich our lives in that way. And sometimes it helps us make sense of who we are.
Thank you, Brother Pro, for all the work you do with Amber. We have collaborated on work through Weeksville with some of your young people, and it is amazing. And I think, Jewel, to your comment in the chat about like making the work for the young people personal, we found that to be very successful, to make it like this about like finding out more about you. It doesn't have to be going so far back, like, but just think about, do you know even about your own parents? How did they meet? And about your grandparents? And I think they became really interested in that. It's been really exciting. And I think something we learned about this work with young people is there isn't like a kid version of genealogy. It just is the work, but like that we were able to translate it in a way that they understood, but that it was the same level of work. And when I tell you, young people are brilliant and they grasp the concepts and they can do it, it's amazing. So I think allowing them to, I think what was so beautiful about the Building on a Legacy workshop series we did with the young people was we didn't treat them as children who only have maybe limited abilities to contribute to this work. We let them do this work on their own. And I think that may even actually help too, Ms. Williams, in like it not being something that we put on them, but allowed them to co-create with us. So just wanted to add that. Brother Ryan, you have anything you want to add?
Yes, what I wanted to add simply is, speaking from a personal perspective as a parent of a 9-year-old and a daughter, I might add, the one thing that I'm observing when it comes to engaging and interacting with young people is that there's nothing, from my experience, better than a role model, because we don't realize that we're being seen or viewed constantly, whether you're just in your home or you're in your profession. So with regards to generating that interest, that curiosity, particularly with young people, if they see you engage in something that isn't necessarily work, but a passion that really has captured your attention, and that at times your child might be fighting you for that attention. What are you doing, Dad? Well, come sit down, let me show you what I'm doing. I'm in this instance, I did a recording of this woman. She's 94 years old, and she's talking about what it was like when she was your age, and how she had to go to the bathroom outside in the woods in a little thingy. And so, I can't believe that. Well, yeah, and that begins the interaction wherein you've captured their attention, you've got their imagination, and it's storytelling. And so in that regards, young people are more apt to sort of get on board, again, if they see you, or in this instance, see me, engaged in something I'm passionate about, that I care about, and that I'm eager to share with her, not beating her over the head, but by opening a door, opening an avenue for her to be introduced to, that she can one day ask me questions or ask her grandmother questions. I often tell her, because she's of this new generation of young people, and they seem to think differently. They're engaged in tablets and all kinds of electronic distractions. But she's fortunate enough on her mother's side to still have both of her grandparents. And I always tell her, don't be all upset because they're short with you, because they ask you to do this and do that. Cherish the time that you have with them. Ask questions. Her maternal grandmother is Ghanaian, speaks Tree in the house constantly. Engage your grandma, engage your nana, ask questions. You've been to Ghana, but ask more questions. Engaging them, young people, as role models is something I would certainly encourage all of us to do, those of us who have an interest in this field and want to engage young people. My thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Sister Skyla, you got your hand raised over there.
Thank you. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that I've heard. And I'll, try not to repeat too much, but yeah, just really helping them to, hold the power in understanding and feeling what that pride is and who they are as young people, because I think back to, my own childhood growing up in the 80s, right? And how, like there are a lot of things that were not celebrated about, like, my physical markers, and this was outside of my family, because within my family, I'm pretty sure colorism was recognized, but it was never mentioned. So I never thought about, my color in relationship to my family members, in Chicago or down south. And, that's a pretty fortunate thing for us as a family. But, just thinking about young people now and how, there are so many different avenues that, they can express themselves through, where they're very prideful about their physical appearances. And I mean, that's still an uphill battle for, just for people of color, for Black people in particular, our hair texture, all these different things that are topics of conversation that I feel shouldn't still be. But, helping them to feel prideful about that, whatever it is, their noses, their foreheads, whatever it is, it's beautiful, and with that, a lot of people, are able to then hold that within themselves as young people and walk with that pride throughout the rest of their lives, right? And when you think about that, there is nothing that puts you in a position where, who you are as a person is completely unwavering. And, the seed can just be planted. You don't know how much or how far or how big it'll grow, especially with young people. And with older people, I find that it's often the same thing, but more related to my profession as an archivist, and also thinking about the work that I've been doing with young people, along, of course, with my own children. I'm a mother of 3. And I often challenge them to find themselves in the archives, and a lot of times we don't think about younger people, especially elementary school, students and high school students using archives. And I've worked with them here in Chicago for the Chicago Metro History Fair. Since, I don't know, this has been an ongoing relationship and commitment that I've had. But, challenging young people to, again, find themselves in the archives, and, just really touching on like that familiarity aspect that Ryan was talking about, and like pulling that out. And for me, I found examples like my family home is in the archives at UIC. It was once a place of like social service, which was established by 2 Black women, so it's like this whole history. But I was able to find that based on just a postcard that I found, like Joyce Leanne. I used to rummage when I was a child, as my grandmother would say, through the drawers, through her purses. And I found this postcard when I was a child that is really interesting, has gained all of this different like information, and I've been able to provide this knowledge on this one object throughout the course of my life. And so I still use that in presentations, in conversations with young people to say, hey, look, I found this object and this is how it's connected. And this is a part of my legacy. What is your legacy? And while they may not have objects, again, like what Ryan was saying, they have stories to connect. You know, they have elders in their lives that they can then pull these stories from. So activating the archives in a way where we're led by them, by their voice, you know, because our young people are very powerful. Our older people and everyone in between are very powerful. But, you know, I often do agree and do see that sometimes we, in a sense, undervalue those younger voices, but, you know, allowing ourselves to be led by them and also helping them to understand that they are a part of this active history that is happening like currently.
Yes, yes, my fellow Black memory worker. Yes, thank you for all that you just articulated about that. I think before we wrap up this question, Gina, I would love for you to chime in about how the work you do, what have you been seeing as far as people's response to maybe pride or just these other things around that Adrian's framework, like legacy building and personal growth and racial justice, like how that ties into the work that you do?
Well, you know, I think that a lot of it has already been mentioned, right? I wanted to piggyback on what Skyla said in terms of, I kind of package what you said, Skyla, in terms of promoting a sense of curiosity. That's one of the things I took away from what you said. And as long as we do that, I mean, Africa is all around us. The initial question asked about African heritage, and Africa is in everything we do. And so when you're looking through the archives and looking for yourself in the archives, when you're working with kids like Brother Tim does, Africa is there. We're wearing it, we're listening to it, it's in our faces. And so if you just ask the question, well, where does that come from? Then that starts a natural curiosity, I think, that extends our sense of understanding and remembrance of who we are. We, in my work, people are curious about where they come from. So we're not dealing, for the most part, with people who don't think that's important. So of the people who think it's important to know where you're from, when they find out, not that they're African, because we already know that, not that they have some percentage of West African ancestry, because we know that. Everybody on this call is a historian. We know that. But the present day country and the people, that gives them a sense of pride. It gives them a sense of place. I should say us. It gives us a sense of belonging, and sparks more curiosity. So then that's when people become researchers. Well, who are these people? What are the traditions? What are the things that we do in our families today that come directly from these traditions? So we see the outcomes of the same type of questioning and that has been discussed already, but just once people find out where they're from, and it's life-changing, it's transformative, because it gives people a sense of place before slavery, which is, you know, the stopping point that people don't always want to deal with, rightfully so, because of the pain. It takes you beyond that and helps you to feel, to learn another component of your identity.
Thank you for adding that. I love, just so, because I don't know how we're going to capture this chat thread for our viewers of this recording, Ryan, that's something we could think about, but I'm really loving the conversation that is happening and this synergy. And this is what I mean about putting all these things being interconnected, and you put people in a space together, and especially with Black folks, you start finding out maybe you might be related, that y'all know y'all 2, 3, 5 degrees removed from connected to each other. So I just love the community building and the connections that are happening in this chat, because I feel like they're going to live beyond today. And I'm really excited to see those blossom and grow, and knowing that we're planting seeds for that here. So I'm going to now ask a frequently asked question that we think you all can relate to. this question of, I don't feel comfortable talking to my parents and asking them about their past. How do I manage that anxiety? So if anyone wants to chime in on that, Julia, thank you for all these great notes. I'm trying to figure out to synthesize it. Yeah, I think I'll just read these notes because I think they're important. This is a great question, and I think that it's important to hear from the panelists about the emotional component of this work. Skylar, this makes me think about a conversation we had last fall. It's important to remember that anxiety can crop up at different stages and at many different levels when we are navigating the past, because uncovering and revealing our past doesn't happen in an empty present. We must process all, and if we think about the present, we see just how much even this current moment that we're in, how it affects disproportionately at points, Black people. And so like when we are finding out often these things, there's issues of racial justice happening and police brutality and being disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And then sometimes we may start to go back. And I think it's beautiful, Gina, what you were saying, that oftentimes people come to you, they already know they want to know, that there is already this positive sense about that, but that there is this other side to going back too. And so like, how do we develop a mindset towards the like silence, resistance, and uncertainty around this work, which can be uncomfortable? So if you all want to speak to that, anyone, maybe a couple folks, so we can move it on to some of our other questions, but maybe we'll take a couple responses to that.
Well, one of the things that I recommend to people, it hasn't been at the parent level, but people say, my grandmother, my aunties, my uncles, they don't want to talk about it. And what we've seen has worked for some families is if the youngest person in the family asks the questions, because the elders tend to, in these instances, tend to be more comfortable talking to the young people, or they can butter them up and warm them up and get them talking. So that's one suggestion that I would have, is to engage a younger person in the conversation. It might make them more comfortable.
That's an excellent suggestion. I just witnessed a 1-year-old with his grandpa, and I mean, that little boy can get that man to do anything he wants. Okay, so I think you're onto something there. Does anyone else want to add anything to that? Take one more response.
Sure. I'll just jump in. I would just say, start with what it is that they do want to talk about, and this is in regards to the question about having anxiety about talking to family about certain things, because I do know that, like in my own personal situation, I wanted to interview my mother for StoryCorps. And, she told me no multiple times. And then eventually, I got her to tell me yes. And, she allowed me to interview her. And I was so happy about it. And also to, have the story archived with the Smithsonian, because I explained to her how important it is that we're a part of, the historical record, all of that. But it was the entry point that actually received the yes was me talking to her about, her relationship with my father, not necessarily growing up in the South and, on the farm and all of those things, but it was something that brought her joy and she was happy to talk about. And my father's deceased. So again, that's a very sensitive, some aspects of their relationship, very sensitive, but, the moment she started talking about that, then it just opened up, and then she volunteered all of this other information that I had this burning desire to know. So sometimes the entryway is just through whatever it is that they actually do talk about and picking up on those things instead of, us trying to direct the conversation in the way that we want it to go, because, maybe we will it's two things. Maybe we'll never get what we want. And then maybe we'll get multiple interviews where it starts off with the one where they shine and, say all these things. And then there's the opportunity for, a second opportunity or maybe even a third. So.
Yes, Denyce, I see you shaking your head over there intently. So I know I said only one more response, but I feel like you got to get up in there and say some things. And Skylar, you can lower your head now.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what she said in terms of how you approach your family members. If you approach it with a more open question about, well, tell me about your time here, or tell me about when you were a teenager, versus tell me about your grandfather or your great grandfather being enslaved or something like that, because that almost immediately, I know I went through it with my grandmother, it almost immediately shuts them down because they don't want to talk about it. If they knew anything, they really don't want to talk about it, because it was, if not traumatic for them, it was traumatic for their parents and their grandparents. So I think approaching it like, well, just tell me about your life, that seems to help them to open up more, because they don't. I think they don't feel like they're being. They don't feel like they're being charged with trying to come up with, some specific points about history and how they felt about it and that kind of thing.
Definitely. Jewel, you have your hand raised. Do you want it? And maybe this is a good, I actually was going to segue into you here soon. So yeah, so maybe that, if you wanted to make a quick comment, and then before we segue, I did want to bring Miss Carrie on here for a second though. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, you can segue to me because I had the next question up.
Okay, great. Yes. And so, we wanted to before we did segue into, because now we're going to get into some more specific questions, which I love that you contributed. I said, this is a person who is doing the work. Okay, you are out there doing this work. And so you have some specific questions, which we love and we want to get into. But I didn't know if Miss Carrie, if you had anything. I know you didn't submit any questions, but is there anything generally that you wanted to say, or maybe just introduce yourself, or yeah, because I know what we have left is really just some questions from Jewel and Hazel. So just wanted to add you in the mix now if this is an appropriate time.
Well, Jewel answered my question. My question was about the younger generation. How can we get them involved and want them to know about our genealogy and our history, without them, keep them interested and not to want, to go to end up in the prison system, because we have such a hard time. But you all already spoke on it, and then Jewel answered me within the text. So
Okay,
that's what my question was. And so you all were talking about it when she was answering me in the text. So you all were really detailed in, how to keep that from happening. And Jewel was very detailed in my answer too.
Yes, that's what we have to figure out how to preserve this chat, because again, it just shows what happens when we put ourselves in spaces together. I love that there's just so much going on in that space as well. Ms. Carrie, did you want to introduce yourself though before you go off mute? Let the people know who you are, where you're from, how you get
sure.
here.
Okay, yes. So I'm Ida Carey, and I am the president of the W. Marvin Delaney branch in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing yourself. And so for people who are viewers who are watching, when they say branches, that is ASALH language. That means like learning more about ASALH and how ASALH functions as a national organization. And there are branches all throughout the nation. So we are happy to have so many of our branch presidents and people who are from various branches here. And so Jewel, we're gonna move into your specific questions. I think that since they are specific, maybe we can probably get through most of them. So yeah, so you could go ahead and introduce yourself. You could lower your hand, but please feel free to start off by whatever thoughts you wanted to share that you had raised your hand for.
Sure. Well, hello again, everyone. My name is Jewel Singletary. I am a creative entrepreneur and self-taught documentarian. And thanks to the work of Dr. Gina Paige and Dr. Rick Kittles, I have been able to trace both my maternal and paternal grandmothers back to our original tribes in Africa. So thank you so much. It's very exciting findings for both of my family. And my work is also featured on the African Burial Ground National Monument, which I know that's how African Ancestry DNA got their start. So one of the questions I wanted to lead off with, as I'm still in the weeds of doing research, I've been researching both sides of my family for the past 7 years. The question I have is there a master reference list of African burial grounds and cemeteries that are across the country, as I'm trying to pinpoint where is the final resting place of some of my family members?
I don't know of a master database at this point. I do know that there's an effort, a pending proposal, I think, to Congress, or they're preparing to propose it to Congress to create a master database. And I know if you go onto Google and Google African American cemetery databases, there are different sites that come up. And I think the one that pertains to the proposal to Congress comes up there's a YouTube video that's available. And then Family Search on their wiki for African American cemeteries has some pretty interesting information as well. But I think they're still working on trying to create a master database.
Ryan, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. In doing some work some years ago in South Carolina, I know that the ASALH branch there in not Charlotte, and oh, it'll come to me. But the resource is that ASALH, their ASALH branches oftentimes are incredible resources for that very specific kind of question that you are inquiring about. I'm trying to remember what is the name of that quaint town in South Carolina that we all love to go to. A tremendous history, Black history. Oh my goodness. It'll come to me, I promise. That I'm had a brain
Charleston?
moment.
Is it Charleston?
Yes, Charleston, thank you. And Charleston, the ASALH branch there has done tremendous work with regards to preserving or restoring Black cemeteries, old slave cemeteries of freed Blacks during the time of slavery that still exist there. ASALH branches are an incredible resource. I would highly recommend getting in touch with the local branch or local branches anywhere that you want to investigate for more information. Thank you, Gina.
Brother Pro?
Gina and Ryan, thank you for that. I was going to speak to something a bit similar. I think that it's also important to keep in mind the time frame in which you want to do the research around Black cemetery. If it's a free African cemetery, if it was a cemetery of enslaved African peoples, that you may also want to consult the archive to check out historical societies and libraries to be able to find cemeteries that may have been lost to time. From what I hear as it stands in New York City, for example, there are 7 known African burial grounds, many of which have been developed over. One has been preserved. There's a fight to preserve the one at the intersections of Bedford and Church Avenue right now in Brooklyn, to not have a condo built on it. And this is also a thing that we need to make sure that we do, particularly within the northern cities, is to be a part of those restoration efforts and to also learn where are these places that were lost to time. I think the national database for ones that currently exist that are more recent are excellent, but I think we also need to do some of that excavation work as well to find out, well, where was a Black community previously? Where were our people interred and buried, so that we can also honor them as gatekeepers in this work.
Thank you all for your responses, Joe. I hope that those were helpful in your work. If you wanted to, is there another one of your questions that, like, because you had such great questions and I just want to make sure we get you the information you need because you got to keep doing this work. And so is there another one of your questions that you think you really are wanting to ask while we have time here today.
Yes, if we have time, the next one I want to ask is, let's see. I'll ask this one as well. So some of the places that my ancestors lived in the early 1900s, they no longer exist. So what's the best place to look for original land maps or old pictures of those areas?
Oh, something I wanted to add. Is this your fifth question? But asked slightly different. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm on the same point, because there was some a context that Julie added to this. In addition to offering tips on this specific question, which I want you to reiterate after I speak, just so they can have that specific question in mind, but just, we would like folks to comment on land ownership, property. We're thinking about rootedness and diaspora, as well as dispossession and displacement. Can any of you comment on how your work and our area of expertise connects to these themes? And then you would reiterate your specific question though.
So that additional context was actually related to like an earlier question that I had on the list. So I will ask that question instead. In the early 1900s as well, I saw that one of my great grandmothers, she owned land in Robeson, North Carolina. How do I find records of her original like deed or anything to verify? Because it says on the census that she was a landowner. Well, how do I find like a document that verifies that outside of the census? And so I think that is the additional context that Julia had added to that question.
Got you. And what was so then reiterate your first question. Sorry that I had got that mixed up there.
It's okay, because actually it's more important. I think that I find out, how do I find out these records if she actually did own land, my great grandmother or grandmother?
Yes. Okay, that sounds great. So we have Denyce with your hand raised, and then Gina, if you want to jump in after that.
Okay, to address the issue of trying to find documentation for your third great grandmother, if what you want to do is research Robeson County, North Carolina deeds, and you can certainly do that by going to the archives, but now in the midst of the pandemic, you can try on Family Search to run a search under catalog, and then type in Robeson, North Carolina. And then if you want to include the keyword of deed or land or property, something like that. And I would search for years previous to 1900 for your great grandmother would have been, third great grandmother would have been a grantee of the deed if she purchased the land. So I would look for indexes for grantee under her name and see if you can find something there. If you don't find deeds, sometimes people are gifted land, either through probate, somebody's estate or something like that. So you may have to research probate records for that county. So it may take time, but if you methodically research, then hopefully you'll come up with something. And then your question about locations that no longer exist, I would go to consult the archives or libraries or repositories in those counties and ask them for maps or map references for that time period. So, and hopefully that will show some of the older towns.
Thank you, Denyce. And you can lower your hand now. And then Gina, if you want to chime in.
Well, Denyce's response was very thorough, and there's no way anything I could ever say could match that, because I'm not hands-on in this area. But I have talked to a number of people, and I was just going to suggest a broader solution if maybe those things don't work. Is it seems as though the historical societies can be helpful when you get to the end of your rope in terms of the tactics that you have available to you. So that might be a suggestion.
Thank you for offering that, because the thing too with some of these specific questions is some of our viewers may be able to see themselves in the question, but may need broader spaces to look. So we appreciate you adding that, Gina. And I think this question, Jewel, and maybe if we have time at the end, maybe we could see if there's anything else, our studio audience wants to ask. But I think this is a good time to segue over to Sister Hazel, because I think your question kind of relates to some of this. And I think we're going to call on you, Denyce and Gina, again in this question. I would love for Sister Hazel to introduce yourself and ask your question, and then I'm going to offer some more context to that Julia has provided. So,
good evening. I am Hazel Gillis. I am the president of the James Weldon Johnson branch of ASALH here in Jacksonville, Florida. Our branch was started in 1995. Now, I am originally from North Carolina, and I've had good responses researching in Guilford County. For the person who had the question. They have good records. But my question is, how does a person determine their American Indian heritage when Ancestry.com says you don't have any? And before you answer that, I started with Ancestry back in 2006 in October, and I was going to cancel that subscription. However, I had a brain aneurysm, so I wasn't able to cancel, so I've continued with that. And I'm so excited that I can actually trace my African heritage to some of the organizations that you ladies and gentlemen have. So my question is, how do I determine my Indian heritage? I'll say also that my father was always told that his mother was a full-blooded Indian, American Indian, but my DNA says 0.
Thank you, Sister Hazel. And I just wanted to add some context to this question that we're thinking, Denyce and Gina, that you could answer. And I know, Brother Pro, that you could also chime in on this. We know that documentation can be important in establishing the rights to entitlements, such as membership, citizenship, land claims, and reparations funds where they exist. Can you comment on this? Provide an example and offer some tips for particular cases raised by this question. And then maybe from there, Gina, there's a more specific context around genetic genealogy as well.
Well, I just want to, if I may, the resolution on some of those tests can be questionable. So just because Ancestry.com didn't find it in your DNA doesn't mean it's not there. That's the first thing. The second thing I'll say is that if, in fact, your father was a full-blooded, or his mother was a full-blooded Native American, then in theory, 25% of your DNA would be Native American. So I can't imagine that they'd be that far off. So that there's a question there as to whether or not, in fact, she was full-blooded, because you should see some significant percentage in your Ancestry.com admixture test results. So we could talk some more offline about it more specifically, but it could be that maybe one of her parents was full-blooded, but not both. A lot of the times in the research that we've done for people, we don't see Native American ancestry as much as our family histories tell us it was there. And there can be a variety of reasons for that. The main one being that we were, especially during the Trail of Tears, we were active members of the community at large. But we're still African American, and over time became part of the community culturally and socially, but the genetics were not necessarily Native American.
Thank you.
Brother Pro.
But in terms of the records, I can't, I'll let someone else talk about the records.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off there. Brother Pro, did you want to chime in a little bit? And then I wanted to we be mindful of time and try to get to some of these other things too, but really wanting you all to check in on this question for Sister Hazel.
All right, peace, Sister Hazel. It's a great question. It's one that I think about really often. I have cousins who are members and enrolled members of Native American groups on Long Island, the Uncle Jug Nation specifically, and of the Shinnecock Nation. My family is not enrolled. My line is not enrolled. Our ancestry is primarily Matinecock, which is a nation that is not recognized by the government of the state of New York or by the federal government. So there are also a number of things to keep in mind as well in terms of what you were searching for. And if you were able to find out what groups, that is helpful. I think that when looking at the DNA, a key thing to keep in mind as well is that there are a lot of people who are trying to utilize the DNA tests to connect to sovereignty or to delegitimize sovereignty within indigeneity. We have people who are trying to delegitimize tribal nations based on their DNA percentage. And I think, I don't want to go too much into the science of it, but there are assumptions about what are markers for Native American DNA. No one has taken DNA swabs from people from 600 years ago to see what that looked like then to compare it to now. The tribal nations that currently exist based on relationships with the government and mistrust of government and private businesses in the US that have been complicit in their genocide and land theft are not contributing their DNA to the database for us to be able to compare and study. I think it's something we need to sit with for a moment. Like in the 2020s, what does it look like for a tribal nation to say, yes, we'll give our DNA to Ancestry? What might that do for their sovereignty? There are people who want that land. That land might be valuable to some. And doing that might actually find a way to have them delegitimized and pushed off because they don't come up Indian enough, so to speak. What I would say is that connecting with local indigenous groups from the places that your ancestors are from and speaking to them like with a clear purpose about what that connection is and what it is that you're investigating, that you're not connecting because you're trying to become a tribal member and want to get a check cut to you, or that you're not there to try to take something, but it is about heritage, can create a level of conversation that may allow you to be able to seek for some of what you're trying to find. The heritage may be within the DNA, genetically, but indigeneity is not measured by DNA, it is measured by culture, and if the grandmothers and grandmothers recognize you. And if that is something that is able to happen based on that relationship as they come to know you, you may be able to find what traditions have existed in your family and be able to find those ancestors, or if not, then you'll get a chance to understand and appreciate the culture.
Thank you, Brother Pro. Miss Audrey, Miss Williams, you have something you wanted to add? Your hand's raised.
Yes, I want to add about the not having the Native American DNA, and that's what happened to me. But I found my great-great-grandfather on the 1890, my paternal great-great-grandfather on the 1890 Indian census, and he's classified as East Carolina Cherokee. But my ancestry said I was like 3%. But so I mean, he's on the census. Then my grandmother is not on the census because she was born after that census was taken. And there was a census that I saw in Ancestry. So there, and with my maternal grandfather, I can't get past his parents. And both of them, she was supposed to be a Sioux. So I was reading one day, they said I should try the Dawes, DAWES role. So I'm going to look at that because, but then again, like you say, when we do the Trail of Tears, when they moved us with them, we may not have that blood. We were just their enslaved people. And so, but it's interesting because when I got my DNA back, I was surprised. I got a lot of European because I was able to trace my dad's side back to Butte, Scotland. They came into Surrey, Virginia. So I do know that part, but can't find the American Indian connection, not on the DNA part.
Thank you, Ms. Williams, for adding. And then Denyce, if you want to chime in, and then Hazel, if you want to just let us know if you feel like your question has been answered after Denyce speaks, then I'm gonna move on to our final few questions.
Okay, just briefly, I do know that at the National Archives site, there's information about the 5 civilized tribes, and they mentioned the Dawes record that Ms. Williams just mentioned. And then secondly, I don't know if this is acceptable or not, but I do know of a researcher, Angela Walton Raji, who has done extensive research in African hyphen Native American genealogy. And you can find her quickly by just Googling her. In fact, she has a class that she teaches on that. So she may have some resources that would help you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You have answered my questions, and I'll make sure I say Native Americans from now. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm a thank you so much. Sister Hazel, you could put yourself back on mute, please. And then I'm going to, there's a question we received from another audience member. Juliet, would you mind just coming off mute just to say this person's name? Just because I just don't want to mess it up. And I just feel I don't want to mess it up. And so maybe you can ask this question.
Sure. Well, I haven't spoken to this member of our community to know the correct pronunciation. So I'll say to everyone and to the world, if I get it wrong, that I'm sorry. But I hope that this will help, because we're gonna take the question. So Lutetia Clipper has asked a question, and shall I actually ask the question? Thank you for including. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I'll go ahead and ask it. Thank you. I just wanted to get the name pronounced correctly. And so the question we have is, it's specific, but then we're going to generalize it. Thank you for including my inquiry on Lloyd William Wells and Amanda James Wells, who were from Virginia and relocated to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I don't have much information on my father's family. His name was Earl Miles. He's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This subject is of recent interest. Unfortunately, a number of my family members are deceased and not available to answer questions. And so what we wanted to do in supporting this community member with this specific question is to ask you all, like, if this was your family, where would you start? And then to generalize this, how do you trace family members across state lines? And also, how do you conduct genealogy research with limited information to start and with no one in your family to answer? Did y'all want me to repeat it again, or y'all was thinking?
Yeah, will you please, if you don't mind?
I do not mind. So this person is asking about that they have some family members that they're trying to look for. And I think they only have so much information. Like, they seem to have a name and a space and a location, but then there's some tracing across family lines. And so, and they don't have other people in the family, like maybe elders, that they can call upon to ask these questions too. And so, just like, where do they start with this kind of research? How do you trace family across state lines? And how do you conduct genealogy research when you have limited information and no one to really ask more within your family about it?
I would start with the federal census records if those individuals were living during that time period. So it would have been primarily for African Americans between 1870 and 1940. For freed persons of color, it may extend back beyond 1870. But to check in the location that you know they resided, and then to also check with the repositories in those counties or those states to see what kind of records are available, because there are in some cities there are city directories, there are deeds and court records and those kinds of things that could possibly help you to connect to them. It's a long road when you don't have any ancestors to consult with, and I know that personally. But I would start with what you know, and then start with the federal census records, and then branch out to other records if you can.
Thank you, Denyce. And so I think to move along to, like, we had asked our panelists to put forth, you know, some frequently asked questions that come their way. And I'm wondering, Ryan, if this came from you, this question around that is asked often about, many people ask me, is it hard to do a video for recording oral histories? Is that something you put forth? If you want to go ahead and chime on that. And then I think, Gina, I'll just set us up for completion. Then Gina, I think this last question will be something for you, and then we will wrap it up here, folks.
Really quickly, because by circumstances, I went to Howard University, got a degree in TV production, et cetera, that ended up sort of backdooring into oral history preservation through video documentation. I didn't plan this, it just sort of happened organically. And it was just a consequence of me having a camera in my hand, having an interest in my own personal family genealogy. My father was an orphan from World War II. So in doing the research on him, I ended up in Germany, blah, blah, blah. And it just so happened my camera was there, and so I recorded it. So this got me on the path of where I am today. And people always say, well, I don't have a big camera, I don't have a studio. So we don't need that, you have a phone. Something as simple as your cell phone that we do seminars with children, teenagers, you can begin the oral history preservation process right in your home with your cell phone. So it's nothing that's hard. It doesn't require a great deal of training. It's just being able to know how to communicate with the individuals with whom you want to ask questions of, formulating your question and having a keen interest in their story. We want to capture the story, we want to be interested, and we want to preserve the story so that when people have this conversation 100 years from now, they have resources they can easily access digitally, or if not some other way, that we have put the time in now to record for preservation's sake. So it's not a hard thing to begin. It's a matter of formulating some questions, getting your phone out, pressing record, and just holding it steady and allowing the conversation to flow. It's not a hard thing, but people, for some reason, they believe you need to have a big camera and all kinds of microphones and stuff. It's not really necessary. A keen interest, curiosity, desire to do the work, and something as small as a cell phone is all you really need to get started.
Thank you. Thank you for letting the people know that this work can meet you where you're at. You know, I think that's something that a lot of people, you know, think that this kind of thing, you have to have all these things to do it. You meet yourself where you're at and utilize what's at your disposal. So I think our final question for the day, Miss Gina, I think this is going to be for you. Has there been any data collection on the demographics of those who utilize the DNA research tools? I'm curious to see what age groups are keen to genealogy research discovery and who's digging into their DNA roots.
So I can't speak to genealogy research tools because we don't work in that space. But from a genetic ancestry testing perspective, I can tell you from African Ancestry.com, we see about 60% of the people that take our test are women and 40% of the people who take our test are men. And the average age of our test takers is around 45 or so. So we really do have a wide range of ages of people who take the test. Some people want the matriarch in the family to take the test. So we have people over 100 years old who have taken the test. And then some people do it for their babies. So there really is a wide range of actual test takers, but the average age is around 45. And quite honestly, that age has gotten younger over time. When we started African Ancestry 18 years ago, our average age was closer to 55. And that made sense because the early adopters of this technology way back then were people who were concerned about their legacy or who were focused on their legacy, and that tends to be older people. But as the mainstream has made ancestry tracing more popular and has made it, has offered very low price tests that give you low value information, more and more people have engaged in genetic ancestry tracing, which therefore has brought the age down for us.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, what your findings are from the work that you've been doing.
I would also say that from a genealogy perspective, because it takes so much time, the genealogists on the call know, and I respect the amount of effort and time and resources that they put into the work. You have to have time. And so I would guess by just what I've seen at different conferences and stuff that they're more active genealogists who are older because maybe they've retired and so they have more time to dedicate to the research. But you know, I don't want to speak for you guys. You all would be the experts.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking to what you know, which, as we have found during this time, is an immense amount of information. And again, we just appreciate the work that you do. We appreciate the work that you all do. I feel like, you know, we can close here unless anybody on the screen is like, oh, I just would be so tight if I don't get to say this one thing. If you have that, this is now is the time to put your hand up and be like, I have something else to say. If I don't see no hands go right up, we gonna wrap this recording on up here. Okay, Brother Pro, take the bait. Okay, send us home.
Only because you gave the bait, Joyce, only because you gave the bait. I think that one of the things I think about also when I teach my workshops here in the community is doing this work is difficult. It is soul work. And it is important to have rituals, whether it is you meditate, that you pray, that you do something before and after each session that is consistent to be able to care for yourself. Professor Payne, when he was teaching me genealogy back at Hunter College, when I was entering into this work more formally, always mentioned that you're going to find some skeletons in the closets, particularly as Black folk doing genealogy. And when you find those difficult moments, those traumatic moments within family history, the things that are difficult to deal with, the things like for me that my ancestry.com profile will autocomplete in terms of like European slave owners back to like the 1200s. And I have members of my family that I'm stuck at a wall with enslavement. I get frustrated. And I think everyone needs an outlet to be able to manage your emotions. For me, it's my creative practice. So I distill all of this into poetry, into music, and I share those tools with those that I teach and those within my family. And the thing I would encourage is that as we all continue to like teach this work and to do this work, that we share those practices of how we hold ourselves together, not just individually, but in community with one another, so that we can let this be healing work rather than that work that just kind of continues to compound our trauma. So I'm grateful to be in community with all of y'all. Now that community that I've been working in has just extended based on this call, which is really dope. So I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you all.
Thank you, Brother Pro, with the final words for our viewers. Again, I am going to be committed to figuring out a way to share this very engaged chat that this communal space we've gathered here today has generated. There's so much going on in the chat that I think will add to the conversation and the questions that have been asked. I want to just thank you all again for joining us, sharing your expertise, sharing your interest and your journeys with us. I look forward to this recording going to be a part of the whole production of this project with all of these resources that we want to have to help people on their journeys to really reuniting with their families, even if that is through ancestral realms, even if that is through just an internal reunion. And so just thank you all for your contributions.
Thank you for joining